Nā mihi ke koutou. Tū taua mai runga, tū taua mai wararo. Tū taua mai roto, tū taua mai waho. Kia tau ai, ki tū te Māori ora, ki te katoa. Homie huie taikie.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. Again, welcome to the committee meeting. To officers that are here, any attending online, etc. I'm joined by Sina Lome and Sarah Claridge in support of the committee, and Chris Dyberg, Chief Infrastructure Officer, subbing in for our Chief Planning Officer who's overseas. Acknowledge the executive leadership team and CE that are here as well. Just turning briefly to housekeeping to explain that this meeting is being recorded, is being live streamed. Health and safety requirements are there on the screen. Those are around fire and emergency in terms of exiting on hearing an alarm and evacuating to Te Maraeohine, the clock tower area, and health and safety, smoking prohibited, defibrillator on the ground floor, and any near misses, please do bring to the attention of administrative staff. For those online, and welcome Councillor Fitzgerald, please do keep your cameras on and microphone muted unless you're addressing the meeting. For those in person, hopefully we're reasonably familiar with the tech, and hopefully the tech is with us. We'll test that out through the day. Please do advise any amendments or additional recommendations to committee administrators at the earliest possible, and ask you to give your name if I have neglected to do so. Moving now to apologies. I believe we have at least an apology from Councillor Hopita. Are there any further apologies? Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a message from Councillor Meehan as an apology, although I note he's not on the committee, and I'll be an apology for early departure.
Early departure, Councillor Wood. Thank you. And Councillor Meehan away. Deputy Mayor.
An apology from the Mayor. Thank you.
Noted. I understand that having granted the Mayor a leave of absence, that is a inclusive apology for the entirety of the time that he is on that leave of absence, but thank you for that reminder. I'll look to move those. I think that Councillor Wood, as you're not a committee member, I think we don't need to formally receive that, but do appreciate the heads up. I'll look to move that, seconded by Councillor Zabellin, and ask for a vote. That's passed 10 votes for, none against. Notification of additional items. I've not been notified of any. Are there any additional items? Not hearing any, we'll move on. Are there any declarations of interest? Again, there being none, we'll move on. I've not been notified of any public comment. And seeing no members of the public currently in the gallery, I think we're safe to move on to item 6, which is the confirmation of the minutes. Are there any points of clarification or corrections required in those minutes? Seeing none, I'll look to move the minutes, that the minutes of the Sustainability Committee meeting of 16th August 2023, Part 1 public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. Seek secondary. Councillor Zabellin, thank you, and call for a vote. That's passed 10 votes in favor with 1 abstention. Moving us to the first substantive item in the reports, which is around resource recovery trials, food scraps, and free rubbish bags. I invite Bryce Hoskins, Group Manager Property and Resource Recovery, and Natasha Heckmont to the table to present that report.
Kia ora, councillors. We'll largely take the report as read, but just some introductory comments. As most of the councillors around the table here will be aware, we have conducted two different trials in the last 6 months, one around free rubbish bags to low income households, whereby they could essentially come into things like front of house and receive a set number of bags and then obviously use them as they would through our curbside collection process, much like if they'd bought them from the supermarket or something like that. And the other trial was around food scraps collection from curbside, which, as we've discussed previously, has been signalled as being mandated, and all councils around the country would need to be implementing that service in one way or another by 2030, I think it is, or at least we fit into that category by 2030. So there is a program being proposed in the LTP to reflect that timeline. And as there is with essentially the major question from here is where to from here now that we've done these trials. Obviously with the impending LTP, there's a bit more work to be done to start to get into a bit of analysis of how we would actually roll out this information and how that would actually look, and if we were to introduce certain services, how would we do that, what would be required, what kind of resourcing and investment would be needed, etc. And so the officers are proposing as part of the LTP a way to address that is a couple of operational programs in year one. One is to look specifically at what would be required around the food scrap service, given that's going to be mandated. The other one, a much more holistic service delivery review, really pretty close to a section 17A, looking at all of our curbside service and how we do that, what our options would be, how we can make improvements, and then also looking at, again, things like investment, where council may have some options, making them quite clear. So a lot of that work is to be done from here. In terms of, I guess, a set direction after the trial for the bags, there was no set program to actually come from that. So essentially we were just bringing back the findings of the trial, and then I guess there was no sort of set direction. It was going to be future decision making. So again, if that is something that councillors wanted to continue with, then that could be reflected through the LTP and possibly explored through that more comprehensive service investigation that we're looking in year one. So happy to take any questions from here and yeah, go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryce. Just checking, Natasha, you're also happy to take questions, or did you have anything to add? Happy to take questions. Great. We do have a few on the queue, starting with Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Bryce and Natasha. It's just a question about the timeline for food waste. So you've talked about the 2030 deadline, but that's not the timeline we're working to, is it? Are we not thinking now that we would introduce this as soon as we can? Or do you need some direction on that?
Probably a balance is the answer to that. So yes, we have to have it in place by 2030, and I suppose, yeah, we're currently proposing it in year 4. So there is a bit
year
of
four?
Year 4 of the LTP is when we would introduce that, which is probably a mix in the middle. There is a bit of things to be looked at in terms of are our current truck fleet actually fit for purpose for that? Do we actually have enough of them? Do we have enough drivers? What would it actually be required to actually deliver the service? Not only from picking it up curbside, but then also actually doing something with it at the other end in terms of processing it. So there is actually a little bit of complexity and some interdependencies that need to be explored. So officer advice would be it's probably not practical to introduce it any quicker than year 4. But yeah, equally, I don't think we want to be leaving it to the 11th hour in terms of 2029 type stuff.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. I'll have a comment later.
Do you have further questions, councillor?
No, I thought there might be a supplementary answer coming
Yeah,
there.
just some additional information. Apologies. Some other councils do need to introduce it by 2027. So equally, you tend to be buying all the trucks and some of that resourcing from the same pool of things as well. So that would be another consideration, that there's going to be a lot of councils all around the country all trying to achieve the same sort of infrastructure to actually deliver the service.
So why are they 2027 and we're 2030?
Hi. So the government have indicated, the MFE have indicated, that some councils will be required to introduce food scraps by 2027, by 1 January 2027. And those are the ones that currently have a processing facility with capacity within a certain distance of that council territorial boundary. I believe it's 150? It's 150 kilometres as the crow flies, I guess is how you'd put it. Currently, we do not have a processing facility within 150 kilometres with capacity to take our food scraps. So we're in this, what they call the second tranche, which is by 1 January 2030. I will also say that the government have indicated to us that that time frame is not changeable, and that if a food scrap service was to be, if a processing facility was developed within our territorial boundary or within 150 kilometres of us, we will not be required to bring it forward. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, very helpful.
Next questions, councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Bryce and Tasha. Just a couple of questions, just really to contextualise some of the results that we got. The first question is around paragraph 3.1, where you talked about 4,076 bags and 1,019 households. Can you give us an indication of that's the percentage of potential households that we could have, what was the uptake?
Can't do my math that quickly, but when we put the original report in, we thought there was just shy of 6,000 households that would be eligible. So 1/6-ish.
Great, that's very helpful, thank you. And the second question, just as in relation to the food scraps trial, from the papers, we got a 7% reduction in the amount of food waste going to landfill. Did we do any benchmarking against perhaps other cities that already have this this service?
Could I just suggest, for administrative ease, perhaps sharing the one microphone?
No, we haven't done that, but that will be part of the investigation that we do next year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Zabelin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I had a couple of questions there as well. I'm just starting at 3.7, where you've got some bullet points there of the survey results, which were really interesting. I am particularly interested in the last two bullet points there, where 8% indicated that council should provide an organic service and 9% indicated that council should provide a bin for rubbish. Can we infer from that the majority response said that we shouldn't provide those things?
Those are the ones that said that. There were quite a few people that did not respond to that open-ended question, so unfortunately I can't actually infer anything. What I can tell you is that that's how many actually took the opportunity to tell us that's what they wanted.
Interesting. Was there quite a variation in uptake in which questions were answered and which weren't?
Yes, there was. Some of them, there was no answer at all, so it was really hard for me to sort of make any inference from the results. So that's why I've just provided the answers that I have.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Secondly, I had at 4.3, where we talked about the 16 tonnes of food scraps that we collected, and you mentioned we had no processing facility within 150 kilometres. So I'm curious what happened to the scraps that we collected.
We process them up at Awapuni, so we have some capacity at Awapuni to process a limited amount of additional food scraps, but we certainly don't have capacity to process a citywide service with our current processing.
Sure, thank you. And last one, 5.3, that second bullet point there talks about additional operating programs proposed for the LTP, one of them being that detailed analysis of citywide organics that you mentioned, Bryce. Just wondering, organics in this sense, is that including green waste, or is that specifically focused on the food curbside collection?
That is a key thing that needs to be considered. So in terms of mandating from MFE, that's food scraps. But it is a very tangible option that we could expand that to potentially pick up green waste as well. And that can get explored through that investigation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair.
Thanks. There don't appear to be any further questions in the queue. I do have a couple for you, though, before you return to the gallery. Just around the free trial around rubbish bags, was there a level of contamination reduction that would have been deemed a success? Was there something you're aiming for there?
We didn't set one explicitly at the outset, but we were, I guess, aiming or hoping for maybe a 10 to 12% reduction. I think it would be fair to say there was nothing, no tangible. There was no tangible as a result of this decrease, though, that we saw.
Sorry, so aiming for or hoping to see kind of 10-ish%. What percent was kind of seen on average then?
I'm just going to have to check the figures. Do you know what our average contamination rate in MRF is? Sitting around 20%. So at the moment, our average contamination through the MRF is roughly 20%. Most other MRFs, including us, so Bryce sort of got it, what I said was slightly, I didn't say it clearly enough to him. We aim to have the overall contamination running through the MRF at around 10 to 12%. But we are sitting at 20 or thereabouts, and we've been consistently sitting at that 20 for some years now.
Thank you. And just to understand, a number of facilities then around the country are achieving that 10% type level?
I'm not sure, and the reason behind that is most of those facilities are run by private companies, and they're not super excited to share their information with a council.
Noted, thanks. Moving on to the food scraps, do we have an estimate of how many tons of, so we intercepted 16 tons, is that right? Do we have an estimate of how many tons was produced over that same time period in those households?
No, we do not. We can make some, obviously that'll be part of the operational program that we're proposing next year, is to look at what does the average household produce. There is some information, but off the top of my head, I do not have it.
Oh, that's all right, thanks. Just, I guess I'm trying to get a sense of, was it 100% diversion or was it kind of 50% diversion? Do we have any broad sense of kind of what diversion rate was actually achieved through the trial period?
Simple answer is no, we don't have an indication of that, and it is quite difficult to ascertain. Some people have their own composting facilities in their house and things like that as well. So a lot of the waste, it's not like it all goes to landfill. A lot of people actually do things themselves, so it is a relatively difficult one to ascertain. Or they use their incinerators sometimes too. So yeah, there are some challenges there.
Thanks for that, yeah, understood. And in terms of the 16 tons that we collected, what have we done with those?
We process that through Awapuni, through our composting facility, along with our commercial food scrap service.
Great, and is there some monitoring of success or otherwise of that into the operation? Or is it just kind of
If you're,
business as
I'm not
usual?
quite sure what you're asking, but what I can tell you is that the contamination rate from the curbside food scraps trial was quite low, which was great, which we were really impressed with. In terms of monitoring, so we have some monitoring programs up at Awapuni for the compost that we produced. We do a lot of temperature profiling, we turn the windrows, and all of those things in line with the composting standards. And before we make the compost that we've produced available, we get it sent to the lab for testing. Is that what you were asking?
That's all very helpful, thank you. Just finally then, before going to Councillor Naylor, just trying to understand kind of the forward thinking. I guess you've talked a little bit about the timeframes and constraints and challenges with the curbside food scrap collection. What's the thinking in terms of initiatives to encourage, support home composting in parallel?
That's a complicated one. So it is certainly something that we encourage. I'm still waiting for the MFE to confirm their key performance indicators that they're going to place on councils in terms of diversion from curbside collections and what that impact might look like and how they will enforce that and how we will enforce that. So there's a lot of still, I guess, unanswered questions that councils have waiting on some more information from the MFE.
So is that kind of the key driver, is MFE tells us what to do and we figure out how to do it, or are we kind of in a listening to community kind of mode and understanding where the community appetite is around diversity of options?
I might start it and then I may end up handing back to Natasha. I guess it's a little bit of both. So we do get some strong direction from MFE that we need to be following. Some of it we can drive ourselves. I think where the interesting conflict may arise is they've set some goals around waste diversion rates, and essentially some benchmarked things by certain dates, and that's only for residential curbside, and that includes organics. I guess the ironic sort of conflict there is if we encourage a whole bunch of people to do their own composting themselves at their house, then in theory that would reduce the amount that we'd be picking up from curbside, which may in turn have make it difficult to meet the targets that are being proposed by MFE. So there's sort of an interesting sort of conflict there.
Great, thank you. Did you want to add anything, Natasha?
Other than the fact that Bryce is correct there, I think some of the things that the MFE are proposing may have unintended consequences.
Thank you for that. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. I'm just coming back to the free rubbish trial and looking at 3.4, the graph there. In 3.4 it talks about there being a slight decrease in contamination. I guess I'm just wanting to check if I'm understanding that correctly. Is that blue line that went from 15% up to 20% and then back down to 15%, is the decrease referring to it coming down from 20 to 15?
So those are just those spot checks of contamination at the MRF at that point in time. So we quite often we regularly do spot checks on contamination at the MRF, and it does fluctuate from time to time. I mean, we're only taking a sample of what comes through the MRF, so if we've grabbed a poor sample, we do our best, our team do our best. So it is quite a variable, but we're finding we're sitting in that sort of 15 to 20% figure constantly for the MRF contamination.
And so what's the basis for the suggestion that there was a decrease given the normal fluctuation and given the period that the bags were available was 11th to the 28th of April, which was just prior to the increase in that line?
So obviously sampling only gives us so much information, and looking at the data, there was a small decrease from contamination from the week prior, in the first week after we introduced the free rubbish bag trial, but then still during the trial it bounced back up again to that 20%. So it's really hard to make an inference if there or any measurable information if there was an impact from that thing from the free trial.
Okay. Just to be clear, the decrease you're talking about at the beginning of that graph, though, was before the bags were made available on the 11th of April. And I'm just checking if I'm understanding it correctly, because the paper talks about the bags being available from the 11th of April to the 28th of April. So I guess I'm looking at the blue line following that time period rather than before that time period.
Yeah, well, I mean, the blue line on the graph, essentially, if you take it at the starting point, it was about 18% looking at that, and then by the end of it, it was 15. So when we say it was a minor decrease over time, I suppose that graph supports that. But equally, I think, speaking to Natasha's point, it also shows a degree of fluctuation during that too. So I guess what is quite difficult is whether that fluctuation was something that would have occurred anyway, or whether it was actually as a result of this trial, and that's a bit difficult to understand.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. You're welcome to take a seat in the gallery. Don't go too far. You'll be with us again soon. So we have the recommendation in front of us. I think just to indicate to members, I do have an additional recommendation as well around the home composting side of things, but I think from a process point of view, we can take the recommendation on the papers first and then move on to that. So I'll look to move the recommendation that the committee receives a memorandum titled Resource Recovery Trials of Food Scraps, Curbside Collection, and Provision of Free Rubbish Bags to Low-Income Households, presented to the committee 11 October. Look for a seconder, Councillor Zabellin, and open up for any comments. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments. First one, just about the food scraps trial. I suppose I hadn't appreciated the long lead-in time that there might be to actually making this service available. I think there was quite a lot of enthusiasm in the community for the trial, and a lot of people hoping that their street would be part of the trial. And the results, from my read, have been very positive in terms of the amount of diversion of food waste away from landfill. So I guess it's a little bit disappointing to hear that we're not going to have it in place until 2028, by my reckoning. I mean, I certainly would have an appetite, if you'll pardon the pun, for bringing it in sooner, if possible. I'm hearing you about being in competition with other councils for resources and processing facilities and so on. But just to indicate that, I guess, along with probably many other members of the community, I had assumed that if the trial was a success, we'd be just rolling into doing it straight away, and I hadn't really taken on board what would be involved. But anyway, I would like to see it sooner if possible, because I think there's definitely demand for it, and the trial has been a good success, so that's great. Secondly, just a word about the free rubbish bags trial. I think it's been very useful, because there's been quite a lot of debate, certainly amongst ourselves, but generally on some of the drivers for contamination. And I think, having seen that there was really effectively no effect of providing the free rubbish bags, it probably gives us a bit more confidence to go out with more accountability measures and education. So I found that really useful anyway. Thank you.
Being no further comments, I'll just briefly say I think it's really encouraging that overall we're taking an innovation approach and looking at trialing, experimenting, learning along the way. And yes, some things work well, and some things we learn something, and we know that we need to perhaps try other ways. So on both of these fronts, I think these trials have been valuable and appreciated, and I know that officers have put a lot of work into doing them and bringing us that information. So really appreciate the huge effort that's been made to get those underway and get the information back to us. And certainly looking ahead to the next iteration of the Waste Management Minimization Plan, I'd hope that we continue to have a strong innovation focus in there. Clearly the kind of targets that are being set, and I think what we're also hearing from the community suggests there's real appetite for continuous improvement here, and doing that with an innovation lens would be really excellent. Similar to Councillor Johnson, also concerned to hear, understand some of those logistical constraints, but concerned to hear that the community may yet be waiting, a number of years, and I think certainly we'll be looking at that closely during long-term plan development and deliberation process to see what we can do to actually bring this opportunity to the community as soon as possible. We know it's a huge generator of waste, a huge generator of emissions out of that waste, and if we can put it to good use through a composting system would be absolutely wonderful. The sooner the better. So on that, I'll invite a vote here, or, sorry, I will take some advice. Learning on the job. Apologies, colleagues, for a slight detour in process then. Apparently before calling for a vote on this, I do need to indicate and ask for consideration of the additional recommendations. So I'll see if we can get that to screen. So this additional recommendation really builds off the discussion around where we go to next in terms of food scrap collection and what we've heard from the community consistently, which is that the community would like to continue to see support and encouragement around composting options. So the recommendation as drafted is that the committee direct the chief executive to develop household and neighborhood level composting options in parallel with curbside food scrap collection service plans for our consideration in the 2434 LTP process, which I'd look to move, seconded by Councillor Zabellin. So just to try to unpack this a little bit before opening for questions or comments on it. I think, what we often hear from community is kind of one size fits all. Some people are really enthusiastic about taking up a curbside collection service. Other people are really enthusiastic about knowing that home composting is well supported and encouraged in the community. And this seeks to make sure that we have both of those options available. So we've seen that kind of feedback from the community, both in the trials that we just run. We see it often in our annual plan submissions, people wanting to make sure that they keep that optionality there. So this is simply putting it in front of us so that when we get to those deliberations in the long-term plan, we can be considering the full range of options. Certainly not looking to prescribe what we'd be doing at this stage. I think, it would be up for officers to come back with options, but I'd hope that we'd be considering, things around education, things around supplies, incentives, and community involvement to see what we could do to get the best out of home and neighborhood composting options as a complement to the curbside collections. We've also heard in the response from officers that there's potentially some tensions and complexities in there which would be useful to tease out through the long-term process as well. I have indicated household and neighborhood. I think the household stuff's pretty straightforward. The neighborhood stuff perhaps deserves a bit of explanation and in my view, exploration. I think when we've got natural catchments such as villages, such as areas around community gardens, etc., we should be open to seeing what we could do to do the resource recovery in a more local way and see those resources kept within those parts of the community. So that's the thinking around including a neighborhood component there as well. So I think that's sufficient by way of introduction. Are there any questions of clarification around that? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I recall we had a submission about this in the annual plan, and I was just trying to find the email, but from memory, a question was put forward about could we develop neighbourhood composting options, because I think that's what was asked for. And I can't remember the precise response we got, but it was something along the lines of it wasn't practical to do. So I'd be keen to have a comment from officers about this recommendation, because had we got a positive response after the, during the annual plan considerations of submissions, I would have been happy to put it forward. But from memory, we got a response to say it wasn't really a doable thing. So I just want to clarify that, please, if we can.
Thank you. I'll look to officers to see who would like to pick that up. Thank you, Bryce.
in terms of the neighbourhood collection, I guess the real, I guess, complexity probably comes around where that would actually go. There are some restrictions in terms of the Reserves Act, for instance. So depending on the zoning of a reserve, that in many cases rules out that as a permitted activity on a reserve. So it's about determining how that could actually happen, where the locations would go, who would run it, would it be us, would it be someone else? I guess also for clarification, speaking to my point from earlier, if it is being dropped off at a point, for instance, such as what we do at Ferguson Street, that does not count towards the curbside collections, even though, which doesn't help with that KPI. So even though we are actually diverting waste, currently as the direction from MFE is that wouldn't count. And I guess there is a degree of risk that maybe a neighbourhood drop-off point for organics may also not qualify. So that's just a consideration. In terms of how could we practically implement this, I think the easiest way is we could just expand that proposed program around implementing curbside organics in year one of the LTP. We can probably just expand the scope of that to also incorporate looking at this.
I do have a comment, if we're in comment now, or are we still in questions?
I'll just check if Councillor Naylor, you have a question or a comment. We might just jump to Councillor Naylor for a question.
Oh, thanks. Sorry. I just was wanting to get you to elaborate a bit more on your comment about what would qualify for MFE. Are they requiring an amount of curbside recycling rather than just it being made available to our community?
They're setting percentage benchmarks, I guess you could say, measured in percentage of waste diverted at certain sort of key milestone dates. And they've been quite explicit in their direction to date that that is curbside, as in being picked up from households curbside. So it doesn't count any commercial arrangements we might have. It does not count anything being dropped off directly at Awapuni or to Ferguson Street or any other kind of drop-off point. It's only curbside. So they've set some very aggressive targets, I think it's fair to say, with quite a key restriction on how we can actually do that. And the curbside for, I guess, pick-up of organics is a big one, and that will divert quite a bit, and it will be key to being able to meet one of those milestones. I guess all I was really trying to signal is there's a few sort of complexities and things that would need to be explored.
Can I just follow that up? Because, and perhaps, I mean, I'm not expecting you to explain on behalf of MFE, but are you aware of what their thinking is in terms of those who are already effectively composting in their own households? Would this potentially be it appears to me to go against what I thought would be a sustainable model going forward, to actually create targets that might mean that people put it out on their roadside instead of composting themselves? Is there any clarity you can provide to help us make sense of that?
I don't think we understand their thinking exactly, but if I could think, how can I put this? If I was to read between the lines, it's about making something easy, accessible and convenient. And for most, the majority, a curbside collection, making it easy, having a bin, having a bucket, having a caddy in your house that you can just put everything in, put it out on your curbside once a week, it's gone, it's easy. So I would, reading between the lines, I would suggest that is why they're focusing on curbside collections. But it is only reading between the lines. I haven't actually had that official conversation.
So just one further follow-up question. Should our decision-making, in your view, be guided by our own city goals or MFE's targets?
Okay, so both, but I guess I can certainly provide more information through the LTP process, but I will say currently MFE are indicating that we, as Bryce said, we have performance standards that we have to meet by 26, 28 and 30 in terms of certain percentage diverted from curbside. What MFE are indicating is that if we do not meet those standards, we will not get our full, or any, potentially, they haven't told us what, of the waste minimisation funding. So we know that basically the carrot and the stick is the waste minimisation funding that we receive. And so those performance standards will be linked to the funding. What I don't know is what that looks like, whether it's a percentage, some, all, or what. Or if we get close, whether they would go, yeah, you're good.
And can you just remind us what the level of that funding is?
Oh, yeah, it's 845. So in the last financial year, council received circa $845,000 in waste minimisation funding. We're budgeting to receive 900. I can't remember the exact figure, but I think it's 950,000 this year. I believe it may be slightly more, and it will increase up to. And I'm hoping Scott can remember the figure I gave him, but I think it was
That's fine.
1.4.
That gives me the general
million?
idea, so, yep, thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you. Just checking, Councillor Zabellan, if you've got a question or a comment. Question as well. Thank you.
Thank you. This has come up as a result of questions. I'm really interested here in the potential increase to the council's operating carbon emissions and air pollution as a result of this, comparative to an approach that might be inclusive of a more neighbourhood or in situ model. Any comment on that?
Probably the only comment is we haven't investigated that to this point, so it's difficult to give you any reply.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. I think that moves us to comments. So start with Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think we might be just taking two steps here where one would be better. So, I would support the Chief Executive in investigating or reporting back on options for household and neighbourhood level composting with all of the pros and cons that might be associated with that. But I think going straight to developing programmes for us to consider in the LTP without having had the information on, for example, how it might affect our waste minimisation funding, for example, what the practicalities of it might be, I think might be just going a bit two steps ahead instead of one. So, I'd be interested in supporting a report back on if this is practical and what the possible consequences are that we might be able to see now. And then, if we're happy, going to developing programmes for LTP consideration. But I'm a bit nervous about going straight to developing the programmes when we're not sure what impact that might have on achieving targets or whatever else it might be. So just to signal that in its current form, I won't be supporting, but I would support an investigation / report back.
Thank you. Councillor Zabellan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And yeah, I take your points, Councillor Johnson. For me, I do feel it's a mistake to prioritise meeting imposed targets with a narrow scope at the expense of proactive initiatives that are already in place and operating well and walking this talk. It sort of feels like we're creating a deterrent or a disadvantage to those that are already exhibiting the behavioural change that we are trying to drive and to facilitate or to enable. And so that piece of information that's just come out about the impact that might have on our funding targets is frankly appalling, that if that central government can set a target and then if a local body is failing to meet those targets or struggling to meet their targets, that they will get less support instead of more support, is completely wrong-headed and is not going to drive success. So I find that a very frustrating aspect of this particular reform. But speaking reform generally, with the scale of reform that we've got going on, this in the waste space, it's legislative reform and the imposition of targets, but compared to the other types of reform, there's a greater level of stability here that we know waste management is going to remain with council, and we have a fair idea of what those changes are going to look like. So I feel that we can take a longer term view here, that there may be more lead-in time for these sorts of things, but we could and reasonably well anticipate that when this comes back up again, we are going to get those same questions from those people who are already using share waste or already composting, and they'll say, is there an opt-out option? What happens to us who are already doing that? I think it's very important that we already have that information to hand and say, here are the options, here's what you can do, here's how we're incorporating your success, and not deterring it at the expense of trying to get more behavioural change across the board. So I think that was all my points. Mainly that the most important thing here is that waste is diverted. Targets or no targets, any waste that's diverted is still a success, whether it's captured in a target or not. And if that impacts our funding, that's frankly a huge flaw in this reform process. So I'll support this on that basis. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. The information that's provided to us does provide quite a complex picture in terms of finding an appropriate way forward. But in my view, the best way for us to move forward is with a two-pronged approach. We clearly need to look at how we meet the MFE targets, and I've got no doubt that that will contribute towards our goals, because there are plenty of people in our community who currently are not likely to compost themselves and will compost if there is a convenient way for them to do that. However, there's also a part of our community who have been composting for many years and would like to continue doing that. And there's also others in our community who would be likely to compost themselves in their own households if they were given some encouragement and information, further information about that. So I fully support the second recommendation. The wording, in my view, says to develop options, and options is information coming back in a timely way for us to be well informed for our LTP process. My understanding of options that come to us during the LTP is that they are costed, and that should come with enough information for us to make well-informed decisions on that. And if we are to defer that to a report back, I'm concerned that that wouldn't meet our timeframes for being able to be making a well-informed decision through the LTP workshop. So I fully support a two-pronged approach here, and I think the second option that gives us options to consider around household and neighbourhood level composting may well be able to be implemented within the next 4 years, and not have to wait for that 4-year sort of timeline where we've been told by officers that we really need that length of time to make sure that we've got the infrastructure in place to be able to support that model. So happy to support both of these options.
Thank you. Don't appear to be any further in the queue. Just checking, we could potentially take, would you like them separated, I'm assuming then? Yeah, so we'll take them one at a time. Look, just briefly by right of reply, well accept your critique, Councillor Johnson, that ideally we would see a report that would, further inform, I think, simply where we are in the time frame of the development of the LTP. The preference was to go with language that kept things open in terms of just developing options and working those through the LTP workshop process, as Councillor Naylor and Councillor Isabella have both alluded to. And just remind everyone, we have at least 4 years now here before we get all the trucks and et cetera organized. There's some real opportunities, I think, to improve our composting and resource recovery game in that space during those 4 years as well. And yes, would hope that we don't become overly driven by centralized KPIs coming at us when we know there's some proven solutions and appetite within our communities. The KPI, and its relevance in a, central Auckland setting versus an Ashurst setting, I think are quite different, and we need to be open to preparing a range of options for our community. So with that, we'll ask for a vote on the second recommendation. That's passed 10 votes for and 1 against. We'll move to the first recommendation. And ask for a vote. That's passed 11 votes for, none against. Thank you. That moves us on to item number 8, which is the report back on the waste management optimization plan progress on actions, and invite Bryce and Natasha to the table again.
Kia ora again. Look, happy to take this report as read. Essentially, this was over the last sort of 12 months, as at 30 June 2023, and as councillors will be aware, we're in the process of creating a new WIMP as part of the long-term plan process, which we brought forward to align better through that, to make sure that the actions contained within the WIMP are directly tied through to some of the programs that are being considered in the LTP. So this is from the last one. We've tried to sort of provide a bit of detail about, I guess, some of the progress over that 12-month period, but we've also tried to expand that a little bit to give a bit more wider context to the life of the 2019 WIMP that you'll see in the attachment. So happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you both for that introduction. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just one question. Looking at the table of the different actions and the overall progress, on RO3, enforcement of illegal dumping, do we not do our own enforcement? Is that a service that's provided by MDC?
Yes, so we contract MDC's regulatory team to do our enforcement for us.
Okay, and could you explain why we do that? Do we not have the ability to do it ourselves, or is it thought to be more efficient that way? Or
It's both capacity and efficiency.
okay, I just wasn't aware of that. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question regarding Action C07, regarding looking at partnership options for organisations around recycling or reusing hard-to-recycle items. I and a number of other councillors are aware of organisations which wish to partner with us. I just want to understand what the timeline for that partnership to take place would be. Are we talking 6 months, 12 months, 3 years?
Yeah, correct. There's several opportunities that essentially present to council in that space for some of those hard to recycle items. Currently, I guess our officer suggestion would be that that decision be tied through into the LTP, where you can weigh up all the different options. It is one of those situations where there are some, at least 2 or 3 very tangible options, and essentially by partnering with them can include anything from being a key feeder of stock through to them, through to leasing some land to them, and probably everything in between. But essentially, in terms of the quantum of stock, there would probably only be enough for one. So council does have a genuine decision to make in that space, but to answer it directly, I think it's probably best had as part of the WIMP, the new WIMP process in the LTP.
do we risk losing the opportunity by waiting sort of 6 to 8 months to make a decision when we've got, as you say, a number of tangible partners ready to go more or less today? I'm just trying to understand why we would wait so long when rubbish is, I'll save that for comment, but.
I suppose to answer the question in a couple of ways, there are some items such as polystyrene that we are actively in negotiations with somebody at the moment to try and introduce that sort of semi-immediately. The more broader sort of partnership option around a whole bunch of those hard to recycle plastics, we could look to try and make that decision prior to the LTP. I guess all I was signalling is actually taking the time to consider them as a whole and all the different options, understanding the benefits and risks of each and the merits of it and how we would actually be working with them. So there is a bit of work to be done. We could do that prior to the LTP if that's what Council wished us to do, but I guess the signalling there is probably an opportunity to bring a paper to you exploring those options and sort of how we might look to enter into a partnership or consider one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If we can get a further comment from the Chief Infrastructure Officer.
Thank you. Look, I can sense some sort of frustration with sort of lack of progress in some of these areas, and I must admit, when I've looked at it in the past and I've thought, well, we've got all these opportunities and everyone's banging at the door and what have you. So, and are we missing opportunities? And I guess as I've come in and looked at it a bit further, just support the advice that Bryce is giving, that there are a lot of people lining up, and it does feel like, are we going to miss an opportunity? The concern that we've got is it's all around about options, and as Bryce said, we're really not that big. We're actually a lot smaller than we probably appreciate in this space, so we do only really have room for one option. And I think the right thing to do is to do the waste minimisation work, understand from a policy setting in terms of what are our objectives as a council, and then we need to really look hard about how, and that's the work that Bryce has signalled that, through the other paper that we want to do, is then have a really good hard look at our operations, saying, I think we need to ask ourselves, is waste something that we even should do ourselves? Are there options to not just partner with someone, but basically, we might be better to do a big partnership and say, hand it off. I think we need to ask those real fundamental questions. So while it is very tempting to progress one of the options that's in front of us now, but all we could end up doing is cutting out some better options later. So look, it is a balance, but I understand why you would sit here today saying, oh man, this looks really good, why don't we just go for it? So look, that's my sense. I want to understand the bigger picture and make and work out what our strategy should be in terms of, delivering on the policy objectives that we decide on.
Did you have any further questions, Councillor Wood? No. All right, thank you. Councillor Zabellin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both. And thank you for especially the appendix. I found that really helpful. I just had two questions from it, one on page 26 and one on page 27. So on page 26, the third line from the bottom, that's CO5 there, talks about providing recycling services to non-residential customers, and the comment there was a reactive approach was taken in the 22-23 year because of restraints, and that's limiting our ability to take on commercial customers. So just wondering if you could talk us a bit through what those restraints are and what the impacts have been.
There's a couple. One is just in terms of essentially a resource actually going out and proactively having those conversations. But I think probably more so, the other side is actually being able to take that on in terms of capacity through our collections, actually processing the things. I mean, if Natasha went out tomorrow and signed up 50 different businesses in the city to be picking up all of that, we simply don't have capacity to actually pick it up and process it. So that's a bit counterproductive. So that is definitely that tension proving to be a bit of a restriction. That being said, when people are coming to us, we are responding to those and we are entering arrangements, and we do have a couple of key ones in place. We work with the Plaza, the hospital, Massey, and things like that. So we do have some partnerships alongside some of the smaller businesses. It's just really that capacity constraint that is a concern. Because what we don't want to do is introduce a service and then have to stop it and start it and stop it and start it, because that's not particularly useful.
Excellent, thank you. So I would hearing you right, if businesses come to us, we're able to work with them, but we're not necessarily going out and drumming up a whole lot of other support for it.
At present, yes.
Awesome, thank you very much. Oh, and there was one more, sorry, over on the page, 27, round about the middle, IN2, investigating a new site for green waste and recycling drop-off facility, and it was deferred as part of annual budget deliberations. Is that being referred to the long-term plan to be picked up again?
Yes, correct.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Michelin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just had a few questions to just sort of fill in some understanding, some gaps in my understanding of this. Bryce, on point 3.5 on page 20, I probably should have asked this question in the previous item, but it's here. You mentioned that there were 1,022 households that took up the opportunity, which resulted in the council providing more than 4,000 rubbish bags or free bags to our community. I just want to understand the financials around it as well. How much did this cost? Was it?
So just for our clarification, you're asking how much the trial actually cost us. Council gave us a budget of $60,000 to do that, and for that trial, and we essentially worked to that and did it for as long as we could within those budget timeframes.
Cool. And on the same page, page 20, last point, you mentioned that 94 of the households that participated indicated that they did not use council bags, but did it because it was free. If they're not using rubbish bags, what are they using?
So it could be people that might have a private service, so they might have actually a bin. And essentially what we did see, or what we were trying to reflect there, is that some of those households that I guess traditionally we hadn't been seeing bags from, actually when they participated in the trial, we did see some bags. So it was just sort of reflecting it was a potential behaviour change that occurred from that.
And on page 22, particularly interested in this. In the next steps, you mentioned that as part of the some of the actions proposed for next year, an investigation of options in respect with curbside rubbish collection is currently in the works. Just want to understand the time frame with it and whether it's going to align with the LTP.
Yeah, so we have an operational program we're proposing to put an operational program to do that service review in year one. So that work would be undertaken in next financial year. And I guess just to provide some clarity of what that'll include, it's pretty much literally everything. So we'll be looking at things like bins versus bags, opportunities to be outsourcing the rubbish collection to an external provider. We'll look at everything in between, really.
Okay.
So it's going to be quite wide-ranging.
Sure. Just to follow up on that, how long would this investigation take? Will that report come before the LTP? Or?
Well, no, it won't come before the LTP because we're proposing it for year one of the LTP. Yeah. At this stage, I couldn't tell you how long the investigation will take, and I would hate to sort of say it'll take 5 months if it takes 7. Ultimately, I think the best advice we could give would be to do as thorough investigation as process and help I guess, enable you to be making the most informed decisions possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bryce. Couple questions from me. Do we know how much progress we've made overall on progress towards the target of 48% diversion?
No, we don't have an exact percentage at this current time, but we certainly, my feeling is that we're not near that 48%. Yeah.
So can I just, in terms of understanding this target, well, the plan was set in place 2019, so we're kind of 4 years into it and a couple years away from hoping to achieve that target. So can I understand why we're in a position of not really knowing how well we're going?
The biggest reason is a lot of the data is collected by the private companies, and some of them, while we've requested the data from them, have cited commercial sensitivity in providing that to us.
So will we ever be in a position where we can actually know this key piece of information?
So we can ask for that information via the bylaw if we license them. We haven't licensed them because the MFE have indicated to us for a number of years they intend to collect that data on our behalf and provide it to us. We're still waiting for that to come through. We're in discussions with it, where we're actively keeping an eye on what the MFE are doing in that process. And I guess this may sound a bit silly, but I didn't think that it would be worth us investing in a program to collect that data, because most of the private companies have said because we actually collect, therefore we're considered a competitor in the market for rubbish. They wanted to make sure that the data that was collected was aggregated before any of the officers reviewed that data. In other words, it was collected by a third party so that there was no I guess, commercial sensitivity involved. So we have elected as officers not to progress that, waiting for the MFE to make their decision, because we didn't think it would be prudent financially to invest in something that then might actually be superseded by a change in government direction. And they've certainly indicated in their papers that we've seen for the new legislation that actually they're taking that ability away from us. So at the moment, the ability for us to license those private providers is through the Current Waste Minimisation Act. And we have, from what we've seen, is under the new proposed legislation that's what's the word I'm looking for? It will be introduced to Parliament post the next election. For its first reading through the select committee process, indicates that ability for us to license the providers might be removed from us.
Great, thanks for that thorough response. In terms of looking at the overall plan, how would you describe the balance across the overall waste hierarchy? So thinking about the, reduce and then reuse and then recycle, et cetera. Like, are we active in all those spaces?
No, we're certainly more active in that, what I would call the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, which is the recycle and collections and processing through the composting and the recycling. The reduce and the reuse is certainly something that we certainly would like to see more emphasis in, and certainly be proposing that.
So we could take from that the thinking going into the next iteration of the plan will be looking further up the hierarchy?
Yes, and it's also because that's what the New Zealand Waste Strategy, the new New Zealand Waste Strategy is also encouraging us to do, is to work to their more circular economy and moving up that waste hierarchy and putting more emphasis in those areas.
Thanks. And in terms of thinking about that future plan as well, what consideration has been given around kind of greater community involvement or greater community engagement in some of those activities?
It's definitely on the radar of something we want to do. However, and to be transparent, we haven't investigated that in any great detail at this point, and it is probably something we need to put a bit more thought into on how that would work and what we're trying to achieve from those kind of engagements, and how we could, achieve the best outcomes we can, whether it be delivered by us or with the community or with a partner.
Great, thank you. Just interested in the system review that's signaled for year one of the long-term plan. Is that likely to develop or identify opportunities or actions that would have cost implications associated with them?
Yes, completely. So, depending on what options and what decisions we made, everything potentially comes with a cost. So even things like introducing food scraps, for instance, as I signalled earlier, we're likely to have to purchase some more trucks. We'll have to get more drivers. We'll have to reinvest in a different way into our composting facility. All of that comes with a capital cost as well. And equally, if we were to say explore bins first bags and decide to move to a bin service that we wanted to provide ourselves, again, some of our current fleet of trucks may no longer be suitable for that. We would actually have to physically go out and buy bins for all of the residents, and all of that comes with a cost.
Yeah, so can I ask what will be done so that we don't end up in a situation where we have kind of findings in year one and then we have to wait potentially years to kind of properly resource that? Are we thinking placeholder budgets or ways to actually bring resource on tap as needed?
We definitely have a placeholder budget in the LTB for the organics collection, food scraps. In terms of the wider service delivery, currently we haven't put any placeholder budgets in. That was proving to be a little bit difficult, simply because there are a lot of things to consider and a lot of options. And whilst we considered how we might be able to do that through a placeholder, it was proving to be a bit challenging, simply because there was just so many variables. It was difficult to pin something down. I mean, again, if council would like us to put a placeholder in at some point, we could do that, but I would be signalling here that until we've actually done the investigation and presented some options to council, it would be very much a blob of money that isn't particularly tied to anything.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for those responses. So it's finally for me, just building a little bit on Councillor Wood's line of questioning and his interests. I've heard the responses from yourself and from the Chief Infrastructure Officer around a preference to keep that a focus in year one of the LTP and the overall service review. In your views, and I'm open to who responds to this, is there a useful intermediate step in terms of an investigative options analysis type thing that could come to elected members for further input?
We could potentially bring a very high level paper that I guess highlights the options and looks at some of those kind of things. The actual investigation itself and getting into any kind of detail, I would suggest, will take some time, and that's probably not feasible to get that to you prior, hence it being proposed in year one. But I think we probably could produce a paper that would look at those different kind of options and at least provide a bit of an overview of what the scope of that investigation might be looking at, and some of the, I guess, a heads up on some of the key considerations that might come.
Great, thank you. And in terms of that report, I assume you'd want some direction around providing that.
Yes, please.
Great, thank you. Appears to be no further questions in the queue, so thank you both. Just while Sarah and Sina are working on putting some additional words on the screen, we'll go ahead and just open up for comment on this. So I'll first look to move that the committee receives the memorandum titled Waste Management Minimization Plan and Actions Presented to Sustainability Committee 11 October 2023. And Councillor Zabellan to second that. And open it up for any comments. Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to pick up on an aspect of the report that talked about the Resource Recovery Fund, and particularly how valuable I think that fund is and what's coming out of it. It's another way that we can indirectly drive that waste diversion outside of those incoming targets that we discussed earlier, and also reflecting the Chief Infrastructure Officer's comments earlier about looking at who does what and what our role is, that diversity, there is already diversity there. The pre-cycle, one of the fund awardees, what they're doing with their paper towel recycling and upcycling into usable products from really large businesses, and their waste audits is driving change for those large businesses with significant waste. It's already making such a difference. Having TerraCycle recycling bins for those hard to recycle items at Environment Network Manawatu, and the Repair Cafe, which has had to relocate to a bigger location, which is so exciting. It's so well subscribed, and so there's a lot of stuff going there in the community that we have been able to facilitate through this fund that we aren't directly driving, but it's just, it is achieving awesome stuff at lots of different levels in the community. So I think that's one to highlight and really celebrate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor McElad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to pick also on this aspect of the report around curbside rubbish collection, which has been a great interest of mine, and I'm sure we've had a lot of conversations about this. We do have a statutory responsibility under the Waste Minimisation Act to promote effective, efficient, and efficient waste management and minimisation within our city. And I believe that in a rapidly changing landscape, in resource recovery and government changes recently implemented and signalled to the industry through the Ministry for the Environment, it allows us for actions within the new waste management and minimisation plan to be transparently aligned with the program being proposed within the LTP to deliver on these actions. And of particular interest to me is the investigation of options in respect to curbside rubbish collection and understanding the benefits, risks, and impacts of introducing a wheelie bin collection service rather than current user pay rubbish bag service that we have, which in my opinion encourages illegal dumping due to some households in our most deprived communities not being able to afford rubbish bags at the supermarket. And for many councils, actually, many councils around the country have actually started on this journey, have moved from rubbish bag collections to actually having wheelie bins. And we're actually one of the fewest councils in the country to actually still rely on user pay service bags. You know, we look at examples of bigger councils like Auckland or Hamilton that are similar size as us, Tauranga, Christchurch, Waipa District Council, Marlborough District Councils, Wellington. Everyone around us has actually moved on this journey, and we are still one of the fewest councils to sort of provide or rely on user pay bag services. And I personally think that it is important that we also jump on this journey as soon as possible and also be ahead of the game, because whether we like it or not, this is something that the government has actually signalled, and through this report has signalled that this is going to be the way forward for a lot of councils. And I do not doubt that the government is actually going to require all councils to move in that direction to meet overall government standards around waste management, and this report suggests so, and government legislations and regulations are pointing in that direction. So I look forward to seeing consideration of delivery models and financial implication of this or these services, or the investigation that will come out of it. You could also pick up through my questioning that, you know, I really wanted to. Some of the we don't have a lot of the answers, but I'm really looking forward to seeing the report so we can sort of jump on this journey as well. So thank you.
Great. Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair, o te rā tēnā tātou. In the same vein as Councillor Zebulin, in terms of some of the things that are highlights, one of the things I want to pick out is on page 27, CO9, you know, the comment that there are the work that has been completed, however I'd suggest it's still going on, with schools and early childhood centres is commendable. And so thank you. I'd like to thank the officers for highlighting this. But when we think of 54 schools and 20 early childhood centres within Palmerston North involved in this, I see that we had a dedicated resource up until September 22 working with those schools. We talk about the educative programs that we could offer to help and assist with waste minimalisation. I think that's a really wonderful achievement there, that we have that established relationship with those schools, that we surveyed them in 2019, that they've been working on that for a number of years. That's something that we can continue, and it's positive. So those young people in those schools are growing up, they're being educated on how to avoid waste, and also learning a variety of strategies to deal with waste minimalisation. So I see that as positive within our community. It's pretty cool. So thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to speak into the points that Councillor Mickelard had raised around almost going back to the past in the fact of promoting wheelie bins for solid waste, as I saw it. And it would have been in the late 2000s that the council intentionally moved away from providing solid waste pickups, moving into a recycling strategy, which was taken up very well by the public. And since then, people were really adopted to have a minimisation around their own solid waste. And the private providers provide for that. So if anyone wants a wheelie bin, they can engage in a private provider, and they actually have access to a landfill where we don't. And for the city, it's actually costing us quite a sum of money per tonne, which has increased over the years. It's eye-watering. And part of the reason for that is because fewer are wanting to use that service, but also it's captured by the commercial operators to be able to drop their waste in their landfill. So I'd be totally against exploring what was being proposed around providing a full service. That would also, waste collection is not free, so it's bad, and we have subsidised those too, the increase over the years. So that is the mechanism that you contribute to the rubbish bag, because that's subsidises, or that contributes to the cost of the pickup service. And so I don't believe we should be providing a wheelie bin for every ratepayer. I actually think that'd be come back with quite a political backlash, actually. And so I just really wanted to speak into that to bring balance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all, and thank you to Councillor Mickelard and Dennison in particular, previewing some of the options that will get looked at in that review. Look, before commenting on the substantive, I'll just briefly speak to the second recommendation, which I have chosen to at least bring to screen to see if there is an interest in a seconder. This was originally in Councillor Wood's care and interest. Unfortunately, he's got a scheduling conflict, and I felt it was a bit unfair to him to time out his recommendation simply on the fact that he had a scheduling issue. I will indicate I'm a bit of two minds on this as to whether this adds value or not in terms of the work that's already been signaled for year one of the LTP, but am open to at least seeing it get up for debate. So I'll just read it out and then see if there is a seconder that's prepared to bring it into debate. The proposed recommendations that the committee direct the chief executive to scope options for advancing plastic recycling partnership with waste to resource providers and report to the Sustainability Committee. There is a seconder, and that is Councillor Naylor. So with that, we'll see if there's any, firstly, comment around this before opening to questions.
So just for clarity, you're asking for a comment on whether number 2 was feasible? Is that?
If you have any comment on number 2, it'd be welcome before we go to questions.
Look, I think it's possible, setting expectations. We are a little bit under-resourced at present. So in reality, I don't think we'd be able to get this to you prior to, say, April next year, in reality. Leading, as we lead into the LTP process, the Christmas break and various other things, and just trying to set some expectations, but it is doable. I think as well, we'd have to put some thought, and officers and myself can go away from here and think about this, of how we can bring that back to you. We are aware of some of the opportunities on the table. That being said, that I couldn't say definitively that they are the only options on the table. So there may be a opportunity to seek expressions of interest around certain elements of this that we may look to do prior to bringing you a report.
Thanks. We get just brief additional comment from the Chief Infrastructure Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be slightly more unequivocal. I don't think this is a good use of our time. I understand the frustration around the table, but we've signalled we want to do a more fundamental and in-depth review in the first year of the LTP, and I think we need to look at a whole lot of things, including exactly this question. So I'm not. My preference would be, as Bryce said, we can do anything you want, but my preference would be we will answer this question if people will be just a little bit more patient, and we can do it as part of a more in-depth review. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nether, you question or comment? Comment, yep, go for it.
Thank you. I hear the officer's comments. I understood earlier that, something high level was an option to bring back. And so I will be supporting the second recommendation on the basis that, if there are partners who are ready to go and there is clear benefit, I think we need to be nimble enough to take those opportunities. We've got a waste minimisation plan that was adopted in 2019, and where it's unclear how much we're progressing on that, but it's clear that we need to make some further progress. And I think when we get to this stage of the time frame, that we're sort of 10 months or less out from our LTP, it feels that a lot of things just get pushed out to the LTP where we have got an agreed plan and strategy. I think we do need to have some mechanisms to take opportunities as they arise. My understanding is that there are partners that are keen and eager and ready to go. If they do meet our current goals and objectives, I would want us to have a process by which we can engage with them and progress. So a high-level report to see if we can have some options to progress without having to wait a full year. I mean, if we're waiting till the point that we're implementing the long-term, year one of the long-term plan, that's a whole year away. I think we need to be a little bit more responsive to that. So happy to support this second recommendation as well as the first one.
Thank you. Councillor Zavelin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, likewise, I have a lot of sympathy for this recommendation. I will support it. I think it is a really specific area of difficulty for recycling. That's the soft plastics, which are highly prevalent in our food packaging. And so it's something that most people come across at some point, that we don't know what to do with these items that are left over from the food we've purchased. In an ideal world, this packaging wouldn't be used in the first place, and that's what I'd really like to see. But until such time, this is a very particular bit of waste that is really difficult for the average person to deal with and have it processed. This question was raised with me when I attended the Girls High Environment Summit earlier in the year, and they were really keen on seeing what council could do about it. And so as a result, I did have some conversations with members of the community, particularly Environment Network Manawatu with their waste lead, with Nelson Harper from Precycle, about what, in your view, what do you think this would actually look like? And what I got back was it's the difference between a collection service and a processing service, and that if we're looking at a collection service, we'd be looking to figure out how we can collect this in some sort of repository and then ship it to somewhere where it can be processed. Or on the other hand, you'd be looking at, do we process this ourselves, and what would we need to be able to do that? So so taking the Chief Infrastructure Officer's comment on board, that there is a comprehensive review coming, I'd like to think that if this work was done in advance of that, it could inform that process, rather than reinventing the wheel or duplicating effort, that it could be complementary or feed into it. So I will support this one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually going to, I guess, debate the opposition to this, and the reason for this is that this particular field of recycling some of the more difficult recyclable items has complexities to it, and of course, as has been alluded to, there are some issues for Palmerston North in terms of scale. So I'm very happy to take the officer's view on this, and that is we just sometimes just end up, I guess, loading more workload onto officers, and in doing so, we actually compound issues in terms of, I guess, getting things done. We've already heard that we've got some progress made around some of our packaging items, and I'm very happy that the council officers actually know a little bit more about this than what we do. So I'm very happy to take their advice, so I won't be supporting the second recommendation. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. I too, although I have sympathy for, that's not probably the right word there, but I do have sympathy for this recommendation. However, I'm not going to support it for the fact that, for the points that Councillor Hancock had mentioned, we've had two officers who have told us that at this moment in time we're under-resourced, and that this isn't possibly the best use of their time at this moment in time. We all know how overloaded really the work schedules are to achieve some certain things, especially with the LTP around the corner. But the other thing is we know that there will be a comprehensive report coming to us that will include information that we want, and information that will present itself very soon. So yes, no, I won't be supporting this. Thank you.
Thanks. I might jump in here and say I find myself in the unique position of being somebody who's moved a recommendation but likely to vote against it, and I know that'll come as a disappointment to some colleagues, and obviously good news to others, but I think on balance, we have heard the concerns from the officers around the time frame that it would take to do this, and knowing that there is a more comprehensive piece of work on the way, I'm comfortable to wait for that. So just wanted folks to know that. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I won't be supporting it either. We just can't, with every report that comes, add an additional report that we require back from officers. The workload is just piling up. If we're taking on board comments from staff, that this isn't the comment from the Chief Infrastructure Officer that this isn't a good use of our time should be the comment that we take on board. But apart from that, we've heard earlier how we're very much focused on the recycling end of the waste hierarchy instead of focusing on the reduce and reuse. And I'm not sure that even if we even if we wanted to, that we should be looking at ways of plastic recycling partnerships, particularly on our small local level. And I'll just refer you to some of the difficulties that have been encountered in fielding with the pyrolysis plant proposal, which has actually garnered quite a lot of public objection. So I think we just need to be careful where we're headed here. If we take a big picture view, we're much better to focus on the reduce, reuse rather than the recycle aspect of things. So I'm not even sure this is the direction we should be going in. And additionally, I'm very wary at the moment of piling report upon report for staff who are already busy enough preparing sufficient information for us for the long-term plan. So, all things considered, won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll take a vote just on recommendation 2. That's lost 2 votes in favour and 8 against. Just not seeing anybody further in the queue, I'll comment briefly around the main recommendation. To acknowledge staff for bringing us a comprehensive report here, and really to say thanks to you and the entire team. You use a 3-letter acronym, business as usual. That means that people are on the streets every day in all weather, picking up, recycling, picking up those bags that Councillor Dennison's very fond of that system, and putting them in trucks. There is a huge amount of community effort delivered to this council, and I think it deserves recognition and appreciation to all those who are doing that very hard work on the ground every day of the year in all weathers. Regard the overall plan, I do see it as kind of a mixed result. We're about 4 or 5 years in, and a lot of good news in there in terms of especially the business as usual being well delivered, and have to recognize that and the value. But on the other hand, it feels like a lot of the things that are in the data space, a lot of things that are in the innovation space are either behind or have been pushed off the too hard basket or the uncertainty basket, and that is concerning because we're now a couple years away from that target of a 48% diversion rate, and we don't even really have visibility in terms of whether or not we're getting there, and we certainly have every indication that there's work yet to be done. So I'd say in terms of looking to that new plan, we want to make sure that it is well focused, that it's balanced across the waste hierarchy, as Councillor Johnson's alluded to, and that we're making best use as well of community involvement and opportunities for working with the community on this. I think to get to those kind of diversion rates, it's about 90,000 people doing the right thing. We're a key catalyst in this, but we need the whole community to be moving with us to achieve that. So very much looking forward to that system review. Looking forward to some of the debates around the service provision models, etc. But very much looking forward to putting ourselves on a much stronger footing in terms of waste management minimization in the future. I'm sure we can hit that 48% target. I think we can actually get beyond that if we can get all the right pieces in place and get them moving. So thank you again to officers for that report. Look for a vote. That's passed unanimously, colleagues. Thank you. We'll break now and come back at 10:55, 5 to 11. Welcome back, and thanks to officers for refining our microphone arrangements, and looking forward to the next item on our agenda, wastewater discharge consent project quarterly update, and would ask Mike Monahan, Group Manager, Three Waters, and Anna Lewis, the Project Manager, to come and introduce the paper before taking questions. Welcome.
Tēnā koutou koutou, ko Mike Monahan ho. Thank you, Mr. Chair and councillors, for the opportunity to present this paper. The Wastewater Discharge Consent Project Nature Calls Quarterly Update. We will just take the paper as read, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you both. Just get some assistance with the technology here. Sorry, we'll try and work out how to get this queue going. The screen has changed, I can tell you that. If you can jump in the queue, Right, we might just pause and see if we can figure this out.
Yeah.
I'm in. Oh.
Thank you, Sarah. Brilliant. First questions from Councillor Johnson.
Great, I'm glad the tech's working there. Just a question around how we're doing for this year's budget. So, you know, we had a lot of questions back from Horizons, and I know you anticipated a lot of questions, but perhaps there were even more than you anticipated, I'm not sure. But it says in 5.3 that councillors, in 5.2, officers will update if able at the committee meeting around the financial spend for this year. So how are we doing?
Yeah, so we do have a report or a figure to report to you. Year to date, we spent $259,659. The year budget, as you can see in the paper, is a $3 million budget for the year. So we think we're tracking pretty well. We've finalised our work packages to respond to the Section 92 questions, and it's within scope of what we thought it would be. So we're tracking okay.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. Just in 3.7, it just talks about that council has till the 29th of September to advise Horizons the time frame, and then it says in the next point, we anticipate we'll be able to provide a verbal update on this at the committee today.
Yes, I can give you that verbal
Thank
update
you.
today. So we anticipate that we will have all questions responded to Horizons by the 26th of June 2024.
Is that time frame acceptable to them?
Yes, it is, and we'll be having meetings shortly to discuss that process as well.
Lovely, thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just segueing from Councillor Naylor's question there, just in terms of the 200 odd questions which we've received from Horizons, can we get some understanding of the general themes that lie within that, in all that questioning?
Sure. In fact, I will pass over to Anna for this one because she's come prepared for this question.
Thank you. I thought someone might ask. So, of the questions, we have grouped them into tranches, so topic areas, and they broadly relate to biosolids, the plant design, groundwater, planning, surface water, air quality, the land application and groundwater and the interaction with the land discharge, river discharge, and some, again, the river mixing and the pH levels of the river. So they're quite broad in terms of their technical areas.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Is there anything in there around stakeholder engagement? Do we have any concerns there?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so is there anything amongst the 200 odd questions that we've got that relate to stakeholder engagement? Do we have any concerns there?
Just before you reply to, I'll just say, I think both microphones can actually now be activated. So you don't have to do the leaning thing if you don't want to. There you go.
The main question that we've received is, and we received as part of the Section 88, which was a response to the application originally about cultural impact assessments being requested as a further information request. So not stakeholder, but relating to iwi.
Okay, so that's all included in the 200. Yep, thank you. That's very helpful. Chair.
Councillor Isabellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both. I have some questions about the biosolids strategy that's at page 32. Just the final comment there on paragraph 4.6 talks about the strategy work packages being on hold pending the outcomes from emerging organic contaminant testing, and that's now been received. So I'm just wondering, with anything of note in those results, but also going forward, what's the time frame now that that's restarted for that biosolid strategy?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you. We did receive the draft report, I might add, for the emerging organic contaminants. And as you might imagine, it was a very scientific report. So at present, that's been our technical team from Stantec going through that report to make sure that everything aligns with what we expected. And we're expecting the final report very soon. But generally, I read most of the report that I could understand, and generally it was quite positive and quite good news. So that will now feed into the biosolid strategy, and we'll come back to you with a timeline on how that might progress.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Gosh, colleagues have done a great job of asking some of the questions that were on my mind. Can you just help us a little bit around overall timeframes in terms of, we've got this time to answer the questions, but kind of you talk about a clock kind of ticking overall. What are the overall timeframes in terms of the consenting process?
Thank you. I can address it. The RMA process, for those of you who understand it, can be quite complicated, and the processing now sits largely with the regulator in terms of, it's their time clock. We've responded to say that we anticipate the Section 92 responses will be 26th of June. That's for those that, are entirely within our control. So, and they have responded to that. They have indicated to us that we currently sit at day 19 of the processing time frame. So there's 20 working days before a notification decision is required to be made. When we finally respond to the 92 questions in June next year, we'll need to discuss with them a potential, whether they need an extension. There's no way they could turn it around in a day of accepting everything. So the time frame is something that we'll continue to discuss with them, but largely as the regulator, that's in their control. They will then need time to review the Section 92 responses, and that could take time. The meeting we have with them on the 31st of this month is to discuss how we get that information to them, how we continue to work with them going forward. Once they have confirmed that they are either A, happy with the responses, or B, we can move to the next part of the process, we may want to consider the next step in the process would be notification. And that's when a consent of this size would most likely be fully publicly notified. I can't see why you'd do anything different. And then that notification process would commence. And from notification, there's 20 working days for that period, and submitters would then submit, and then Horizons would continue to work through the RMA time frame to assess those submissions.
Thanks for that outline. I guess what I'm trying to understand is kind of how that plays out relative to potential reforms and us kind of being pushed further and further to the sidelines. Are there things that we can do to get through as much as we can while we still have at least some control before we potentially get into a situation of very diluted control?
can address that from the RMA perspective. Mike's best to talk to the entity, I'm guessing. But from an RMA perspective, the consent conditions, and we PNCC had to respond to the condition 23C. That was the main reason this application had to be brought forward, and that has to happen regardless of the entity process. So whether it's PNCC or the water entity, the RMA consents will expire when they expire, and the application will continue to be processed with Horizons. I guess with the changes between councils or the entities, or what happens next, I can't speak to that, but I'll hand over to Mike.
Oh, thanks, Anna. And I'm probably not that keen to speculate on where this whole thing might go as far as the water entities go. But our current consents, I can speak to that. Our current consents last till 2028, and the project, I think we're estimating that 2033 is when the new wastewater treatment consent will be active from. So there is quite a lengthy time period to get us to there. So I'm not quite sure how we will, or what will happen with the water reform.
All right, thank you. And just to confirm, I think it's kind of a complementary question, the one you had around budget, but the 200 questions that are in front of you can be answered within budget in terms of your current assessment of them?
Correct.
Yeah, great, thank you. Appear to be no further questions, so thank you both. So you have a recommendation in front of us that the committee received the report titled Wastewater Discharge Consent Project, Nature Calls, Quarterly Update, presented to the committee 11 October. I'll look to move that. Second by Councillor Zabelin, and open up for any comments. Just say a few words and see if that prompts any other comments from others. Firstly, appreciation to you both and the whole team that's working on this. 200 questions sounds like a mammoth homework assignment, and so really appreciate the hard work that'll be going into that between now and the end of June. And just really want to reemphasize this is incredibly high stakes in terms of for the city. And for the river, and the importance of getting really strong engagement and strong process right throughout. And I think there is undoubtedly some uncertainty around water reform, and some of that may get partially determined at least on Saturday. And I think we as a council need to be very alive and aware to kind of how we continue to navigate through a still very fluid, if we can say that, environment in terms of who's actually got hold of the reins. So yeah, look, thanks to you both and for all the work you're doing, and wish you well with not only the engagement with the regulator, but the community and relationship management stuff with the water community, iwi, et cetera, as well. There's a lot of a lot of complexity there as well, and I understand you guys are doing your best with a tremendous amount of work in front of you, so wish you well on it. Thank you. With that, we'll ask for a vote. Passed 10 votes for, none against, which brings us to item 10 on the agenda. Page 35, PNCC Citywide Emissions Inventory 2022, and would ask Adam Jarvis, Acting City Planning Manager, and David Watson, the Senior Climate Change Advisor, to present. I believe there is a brief presentation with this as well, so well, thank you. this is a wonderful pause for effect that really just draws everyone's attention.
So, good morning, Mr. Chair, councillors. I would hope that the majority of the report is fairly self-explanatory, but I thought it might be useful for context to provide a few extra graphs and talk you through exactly how we got to where we are in this inventory. So, the previous inventories that we have presented to this committee were based on an initial methodology produced by AECOM in 2018. This produced some somewhat unusual results, particularly around 2020 and 2021, which led us to further investigate the methodology itself and see whether it was errors on our part or errors within the methodology. And it turns out it was the latter of those. So we have done a root and branch review of the entire process of producing our citywide inventory and come up with something much different, really, using the same base data, but using a more standardized methodology for producing the actual inventory itself. And as you can see, the original inventory from the 2018 model is in green, and the revised inventory is in orange, which leads us to a not dissimilar conclusions, but so part of the reason why the new inventory looks the way it does, particularly from the 2016-17 baseline, is due to forestry harvest emissions. So just skip back to the, yes, how we have to do this now.
Yes, that one.
Yeah, so you can see that the 2016-17 orange, the first orange dot, as it were, is considerably lower than the others, which means since that is the baseline by which we established our targets, we are not currently on a similar trajectory to the targets that we would want to be at if we were going to achieve our 30% reduction by 2031. So you might, from this graph, conclude that we are not actually achieving very much in terms of reducing overall emissions compared to our targets. The reason for that is a lot to do with the selection of the base year. So this is the emissions from forestry harvesting during the period of the inventory. So you can see that the 2016-17 harvest emissions are far lower than subsequent years. And it may actually be the case that the 2019, 20, 21 and 22 data is actually higher than that, but currently MPI have not published data for that. So those areas are estimates. So it could well be the case that because harvest emissions run in cycles and because harvest planting runs in cycles, we might end up saying it may appear that we're not doing well against our baseline target, but that's because the baseline year that we selected was unusual. So what we can do to take account of that is if rather than taking the harvest emissions from any one particular year, you average them over a longer time period, you can see that our gross emissions, if you average the forestry, does actually show a downward trend, and we are approaching being on target for our 2031 emissions targets. So there is further work to do in terms of having a better understanding of what our harvest emissions are and how best to present those, so that we are taking account of these fluctuations in the harvest cycle and the planting cycle over the last 30 years, to make it a more reasonable and more kind of factual representation of what's actually going on, rather than being highly swung by one variable. makes sense. It's also worth noting per capita emissions. So whilst it's fair to say that discounting our first baseline year was working from 2018 onwards, it does not appear that emissions have gone down greatly. Our population has increased a fair amount over the same period, so our per capita emissions are declining. I would not want to put that forward as any kind of indication of positive change, because absolute emissions are what we're aiming for, and absolute emissions are what our target is based on. And whilst our per capita emissions might well be going down, absolute emissions is what counts as far as climate change is concerned.
Some positive signs in any case.
Yeah. So progress is being made, but there are some statistical and sort of data reasons why it doesn't necessarily look that way from the first graph. So happy to take questions.
Great, thank you both for the report. A few questions coming in here. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation, which was very helpful. Just in terms of the harvesting kind of cycle, what's the sort of, turnaround period of that harvesting cycle? Is it a 30-year cycle we're looking at, or?
So I have more graphs in case these questions came up.
Oh, do treat us to some more graphs.
If you want to get really into the forest data, there's a lot more we could talk about. So this is the current age classes of forestry in New Zealand. So you can see that there's a very large spike around sort of 22 to 26 years of age, which is the point at which forests are usually harvested.
Yeah.
So you could say that there's a lot of harvesting going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, but there aren't nearly so many forests that are sort of 10 to 14 years of age. So by the time we start getting towards 2030, the forestry harvesting will have declined because there's less forest to harvest, if that makes sense. This is the kind of historic trend, but obviously with the emissions trading scheme providing carbon credits for forestry, people are hanging on to their forests longer, unless they are a commercial forestry operation that has kind of built-in financial incentives.
It's probably reasonable to assume that given the increase in the price of the ETS over the last, let's say 4 years, since the passage of the Zero Carbon Act, that the trend that you're seeing there in the last 5 years of a large pickup in forestry, tripling or so from the kind of baseline of the early 2000s, is probably likely to continue. So just something to note there.
Okay.
We've
got another graph?
Yeah. Carbon stock cycle as a kind of, from an academic perspective. So not necessarily, not necessarily predictive, but historically, this is kind of what research would tell you a normal cycle would look like.
Okay. I have another quick question. I'm surprised that, given we're mostly an urban kind of centre, that forestry has such a big impact. So, I don't know quite how you measure it, but what percentage of our kind of territory is forestry? It wouldn't be huge, presumably.
I could come back to you. We could run some quick analysis and get you some data on that. But I think it would be fair to say that between the permanent indigenous forest and plantation harvest, that it would be roughly the same size as the urban area or greater. So it's actually, quite substantial. Also just note that that unusual baseline year is caused by roughly a third of so in other words, between our baseline year and in 2018 and the average since then, harvest emissions have roughly tripled. So it was a very unusual year that we ended up selecting, and unfortunately that wasn't picked up at the time because of some of the issues that we've talked about, or briefly mentioned at the start of this presentation and have talked about it in previous presentations.
But we can smooth it out by using a rolling average type.
Right. Well, there's a couple of different approaches we could take, but we could, a moving average is probably the simplest of them.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just picking up on that as well. So at 1.3, we did talk about the adjustments that were made to reduce or remove those errors in the calculation process from the previous years. I'm interested in teasing out, just for my understanding, the methodological errors. Is that related to having an unusual baseline with non-standard forestry activity, or are they separate things that have skewed the results?
There were errors in the forestry, but more generally, the issues were sort of systematic across most of the inventory. Certain classes of emissions weren't properly accounted for, that they were calculated in one pace of the methodology, but then not added through things. So often it was quite subtle, and it really only was when David began to fully dive into it that we were kind of able to start to identify some of these things, because on the surface of it, when we looked at it all seemed reasonable, but there was just data that wasn't being passed through, even though it would. The text associated with the methodology suggested that it was, if that makes sense.
Right, thank you. Yeah, so I understand now. So that's one's actually calculating things, and the other one is more about how you are analysing the data that you've got and making sense of it. Is that about right?
Sure.
Cool, thank you. And just another one at 4.2, we talk about electricity generation. I was assuming the description and the figures you've got in there are presenting a national picture rather than a local picture. Is that right or not?
Okay, that.
This talks about coal power and things like that.
So obviously, energy for the city is bought from the grid, and the power that goes into the grid is generated from several sources, largely dependent on how much rains. And because of the large amount of hydropower that goes into the grid, the more hydropower is available, the less base load is needed from other sources such as coal power handling. So the more it rains, the kind of less carbon intensive generating electricity generally is.
Yeah.
And because we buy our electricity from the grid, that applies to everybody across the country.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Thank you. So the percentages that we've got in here are specifically related to the generation of, rather than our consumption of.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions for me, I guess. Now that we're getting to a firmer set of numbers, how are we using these numbers to influence decision-making, influence option identification, etc.?
There's sort of a range of ways. I would say in the first instance, there's just sort of day-to-day discussions and things that occur in terms of applications to waka kotahi in terms of co-funding and so forth, where there's some modelling being done. The various district plan changes that are being undertaken at the moment. There's analysis of the carbon impact of those, the various options available. But more generally, we've got some advice coming to this committee in November that sort of unpacks a little bit more some of the implications of this. And then, of course, there's the long-term plan decisions to be made next year, which are obviously quite substantial. And I think we've got some information coming to you, or some modelling that we expect to be delivering on that note and to the March 2024 committee as well.
Great, thanks for those pointers. It's really encouraging me to see, some specific components of emissions are now on their way down? I mean, obviously there's some that are still on their way up, but where we are succeeding, do we know why? Do we understand why why things are improving in some cases?
I think there's, in section 4 of the report outlines some of the key elements that are specific to, the recent years. The more generally, the inventory is a reflection of what's happening in the city and the decisions that 90,000 people are making as a result of things like fuel prices and electricity prices and the availability of electric vehicles and working from home. And so really, in some respects, you could see this as you could view it as an economic report viewed through the lens of carbon. So to sort of answer definitively about any one of these, the causality of some of this is really to try and describe what's happening across, an entire sector of Palmerston North. So we can certainly point at some changes that have occurred. I mean, petrol prices would be one such example, and the influence of the increase of costs of carbon through the emissions trading scheme probably being the core one of those. So that, we've gone from a period, from a section there a decade ago where the price was in the low to high single digits. Now we're at least 10 times that, and then that's having an influence on people's behaviour in terms of, making it slightly more expensive to produce carbon relative to low carbon options like active transport or public transport or whatever.
Thank you. And finally, as given again that there's been some recalculation numbers and, as you said, root and branch kind of approach to sorting it out, would you say it's a firm conclusion now that we've plateaued or shown the plateau over the last few years? Is that quite a firm conclusion?
I'd suggest that per capita emissions certainly have plateaued, and there's increasingly strong evidence that they're on their way down. That's obviously, that's as you see in the data, that's offset by population growth, but certainly on the per capita side, I don't think there would be any reason to believe at this stage that trend would dramatically reverse anytime soon.
Great, thank you. No further questions. We'll see you again in a moment. So we have a recommendation in front of us that the committee note that net emissions for Palmerston North City for the 2022 calendar year were 690,590 tons CO2 equivalent, which is 30,078 tons reduction compared to 2021, and is a 70,273 ton increase since the baseline 2016-17. I'll look to move that, seconded by Councillor Zabellin, and open up if there's any comments. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, I will say that I think this whole topic has been difficult to get my head around over the years, if I'm honest. But I think I'm increasingly getting to grips with it, and probably as well, I think we're getting a better kind of bigger picture of what contributes to the carbon emissions in the city. And certainly, prior to all this work, I would have had a very different view about where the contributions were coming from. So if nothing else, it's helpful in elucidating that aspect. But I think as well, when we hear how it's contributing to decision making in terms of carbon impact of district plan changes, carbon impact of significant capital projects or programs that we might be looking at for the long-term plan, then I think its kind of utility is very much in the kind of practical realm. I think in terms of confidence in the results themselves, I think as every year goes by, we have more confidence that we sort of know what we're doing. And certainly, in terms of the per capita decrease, I think that's quite encouraging. I mean, obviously, we understand if the sort of gross emissions are still high, that's what's having an effect on the climate. But to hear that the per capita emissions are reducing does give us some hope that perhaps we're on a downward trend in terms of people's individual carbon footprints. I think that's quite encouraging. Plus, I would like to say that I love a good graph, but more than that, I love bonus graphs if you ask the right question. So that made me very happy indeed. Thank you.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to pick up on the forestry discussion that we've had and reflect on the influence that forestry does have on our citywide emissions. As Councillor Johnson pointed out, it's not a natural jump to go. That's where it is for us as largely an urban centre. But I have been having some conversations with some of our rural community lately, especially out in the foothill, Linton, Turitea, ways towards Millricks Line and Scotts Road, and there has been a lot of forestry activity going on out there for the last few years, but also there's a lot of production and permanent forestry that's going in the foothills. So that's quite a extensive planting program that's happening up there, and I think it's just worth us keeping in mind that that is an influential factor in our emissions. And as some of these are permanent forests, not production forests, that may well contribute to a downward trend for us in the future as those forests start to grow to maturity. But they are only just baby forests now, so it's a long-term play, that one. But it is worth us keeping in mind that though we are urban, we do have a large amount of forestry going on around us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'll just briefly add my voice to firstly thank officers for the comprehensive work that's now been done to actually get to the bottom of these numbers. And I know it's not always easy to go into historic data sets and actually tease things out. So appreciate the effort to get us to a firm footing now where we really do have a better understanding of the numbers and what they're telling us. It's quite pleasing actually to me to see that, particularly in some areas, we're making real progress. So look at that petrol graph and see it just nicely trending down over the years. That's really great to see if there's something that's there, certainly over and above whatever was going on in terms of COVID response measures, et cetera. There is actually a long-term trend in decline in some of these areas, which is really heartening. But the big picture there still of really being in a plateau scenario is concerning. We know that we need to be getting all of us throughout the whole community a much stronger response in this space. I mean, I won't give you the full climate crisis speech at this point, but it's a massively wicked problem that we have huge challenges. We actually know what the solutions are. It's actually getting to the implementation of them that continues to be the hurdle. So, the message coming through from this is really twofold to my mind. One is continuing to ramp up those efforts around emissions reduction in the city, building on some of the cases where we can see that there's some emerging evidence of success and positive trends, but as well, really having some honest conversations with ourselves about the adaptation and resilience side of things, because we can see there's a whole lot of challenges coming at us in the pipeline simply through the level of climate change that we're already experiencing, and we need to make sure that this community's well set up from the adaptation and resilience point of view while we continue to work on the emissions picture. But it's just so heartening to see a strong data set now that really I think can be used to properly inform decision making. I'm very pleased to hear that officers have turned their mind to how best to use the information that we now have in this inventory to influence our planning decisions, our hopefully procurement decisions, and a range of other decisions that we're making as a council and as a wider community. So thank you to officers for the efforts. And with that, we'll look for a vote. Thank you. That's passed 10 votes for, none against. I'll ask Adam and David to return to now present item 11, which is our organizational emissions. Very much on the same theme, but at an organizational level. Thank you, gentlemen. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, councillors. Sorry, no more graphs for this one. It is probably just briefly pointing out the headline, I suppose, for this report is that on current numbers, it appears at first glance that we have achieved our 30% reduction, albeit sitting at 31.5%, which would put us sort of 7 years ahead of schedule, which is good news. And I'd just like to sit here with that good news for a moment before we add the caveats to it. So the news that sits behind this recommendation and the detail in the report is more around the changes to non-landfill related emissions, which are declining, and our emissions across the board continue to decline, with a couple of notable exceptions where substantial changes have been made, such as the Freiburg swimming pool. But yes, hopefully generally good news and progress into the future.
Just a few notes. Firstly, the trend that we talked about in the previous report regarding electricity emissions being unusually low does impact this report partially, although this, just noting that the reporting period is slightly different. It's 6 months in advance of the previous report. In any case, the per kilowatt hour that we use, the emissions associated with that were lower than both previous years and probably that we could reasonably expect from future years as well. So perhaps just a note there. Secondly, nonetheless, with that achievement of a 30% reduction target, either tentatively behind us and likely to be firmly behind us in the not too distant future, just to note that there's an expectation from some of our partners in central government that we look to affirm a new target, probably through the next LTP. So just something to note there. It will become increasingly critical and that we have something in place in order to tick particular boxes for co-funding and so forth. So we can obviously come back to, well, we will be coming back with some advice around that in March, I believe. Yeah, with that, happy to take any questions.
Thank you both. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks for the report. I'm just looking on page 49 at the graph that emissions that were excluding landfills, and the dark blue one, which I think is workplace travel. It's a bit hard to line up. That's correct. I'm just wondering why that has increased. Sort of, it seems in the last couple of years, it seems quite a bit bigger than the previous 6 years.
The primary reason for that is just that the number of staff in council has grown, I think by about 20% or so since the start of records beginning.
So have the emissions increased as a
per capita?
Per capita more though? Because like the difference, I mean obviously there's the COVID effect, but the difference between those first 6 and perhaps the last 2 years to me looks like more than a 20% growth.
Sure. As I understand it, there is should we say per capita growth. It's not evident in the median, that the median staff member hasn't changed, but I guess post-COVID we are seeing more people commuting from significantly further away than we had previously, and that's probably in large part due to the kind of the relative attractiveness of hybrid working arrangements. So if you're only commuting 3 days a week, but if you compare commuting 3 days a week from Whanganui, say, compared to a person commuting 5 days a week but from Highbury, then the 3 days a week from Whanganui is, something in the order of maybe 5 times greater in terms of emissions.
Okay, and just second question, does this include overseas travel?
That's not in workplace travel.
No, sorry, the chart, like there's a transport one, the blue one. Does overseas travel, is that included in any of these categories?
It is included. Sorry, I'm not.
It's
it
within
is,
workplace
It
travel.
is within workplace travel. Sorry, yes, it is.
It is in workplace travel.
Yeah.
And does that include elect member travel as well?
Yes. So there's at least 3 different categories within that. Subcategories. So it'd be taxi
Yes.
travel.
All air travel and taxi travel that is paid for by council.
Yes.
And an estimation of the travel of staff commuting to and from work.
2 separate subcategories that both included within that dark blue block. There.
And so do we have a further breakdown to understand how much that increase in the last 2 years is driven by the amount of overseas travel?
We can provide you with that data.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a paper?
Just to follow up, you could provide that just offline, you mean, or?
So that's a level of detail that we didn't include in this report, but we actually have, what this inventory is comprised of is emissions data going down to individual vehicles. So it can be disaggregated right down to the level of every individual thing. And I know that's not what you're interested in, but just to give you some context. So any individual piece of this in air travel we can provide that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. So, same chart on page 50. Just wondering if the increase in, sorry, not page 50. Oh, yes, it is. Lost my page, sorry. Yeah, page 50. The increase in emissions from aquatic centres over the last couple of years, is that due to bringing Splashhurst online, or is there some other reason for that?
Yeah, so Splashhurst and Freiburg have undergone changes in the last reporting period that caused them to increase their emissions.
Okay, so the increase in the last couple of years isn't due to there being an additional pool, it's due to changes that have taken place at those 2 pools?
The heating in particular.
Heating.
Yeah.
So, since that's almost double what it was in the base year, have we got plans to try and bring that down in some way?
So there's work, even just in the last year, there's been not inconsiderable amount of work looking at improving the energy efficiency of the aquatic centres through the Low Carbon Fund. So there was, we did some initial work looking at pool covers and some energy efficiency improvements at the Lido in particular. I think we're continuing to do some analysis about what the most effective way is to address emissions at Freiburg and build on the work that's already been done at the Lido as well.
So has the source of the heating changed?
As I understand it, the level of service has increased, essentially, at those sites.
Right, okay.
At Freiburg in particular.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. Just interested around the work from the numbers in the table rather than the graph at page 50. The waste management line there in particular looks very impressive, having gone from nearly 500 down to less than 100 over the course of those years. Can you just unpack that a little bit? I know there's a footnote, and I guess what I'm trying to understand is how much of that is actual improvements in diversion, waste minimization, and how much of it's kind of a natural decay effect.
So the natural decay is in that sort of third line landfills. So you can see the number there's decreased from roughly 19,000 to 12,000. So that's essentially the closed landfills of Ashurst and Awapuni. Yep. Waste management is the emissions associated with the waste management activity itself. So there's been large numbers of improvements made at the materials recovery facility, for example, in terms of energy efficiency upgrades there. And I think the utilisation of some renewable energy. But again, in terms of specifics, we can probably get back to you in terms of that if you were interested.
Thanks. That's really helpful clarification. So, have we done anything as an organization to celebrate that, getting from nearly 500 to less than 100?
So there's been various kind of articles in the likes of the Sustainability Report and through Palmy Proud magazine. You might recall there was several electric rubbish trucks that were in operation now. So there's certainly been comms around that, but we could look at continuing to celebrate that, I'm sure.
Thanks. That's great. I think that's it for me for questions as well. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Naylor's back in.
Apologies to come back a second time. I know this question has been discussed before, so apologies if I've missed it somewhere. But the carbon emissions that relates to capital and operational programs, there has been discussion on whether that is able to be shown in the decision-making process around the long-term plan or other decision-making processes on capital investment or other new operational programs. I heard that there was some work so that we could get some sight about the carbon emission impact of new programs. Is that something that is being worked on, or is that something we could expect in the future, and if so, when?
So I would say that we did some initial work at the start of this year, early last year and the start of this year, looking at doing what you've just described in a comprehensive fashion. Particularly looking forward to the LTP. Unfortunately, due to a whole range of time pressures and complications with new financial systems and all, the laundry list of essentially the determination was made that we weren't going to have the capacity this round to be doing that in a comprehensive fashion, and rather that we needed to limit ourselves to significant projects where that information or that analysis is being done.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So in terms of defining significant projects, is that significant in terms of the amount determined by a capital amount spent, or what's the what can we expect? So if something comes to us for a decision that is if it's over a certain amount, or if its impact is in terms of its carbon emissions is over a certain amount?
Probably the latter. Obviously, we can't tell until we've done the analysis exactly how big the impact's going to be, or how big we expect it to be. But the intention is that the second of those two. So where we have a good reason to believe that the carbon emissions impact of a particular program is likely to be large, then we would do an analysis in order to determine what exactly that might be, or to forecast what that would be.
Councillor, the Chief Executive would like to comment as well.
Thank you, through the Chair. A couple of other things in there just to keep in mind as well is that we are through procurement processes and the like as well, looking to put that environmental sustainability lens into those processes, so then when projects are actually developed that we take account for those matters, but also in the significance policy aspects as well. So when reports come back to Council in the future, there should be some commentary in relation to the item that's been discussed around environmental sustainability and climate change matters in order for you to make a better decision.
Great, thanks. There don't appear to be any further questions. Thank you both for presenting the report. look to move the recommendation that the committee note that PNCC organizational emissions have fallen from 26,444 tons in 15-16 to 18,155 tons in 22-23, a 31.5% reduction. And look to a second, Councillor Zabelin, and open up for any comments. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. This is obviously a really pleasing outcome, that we're heading in the right direction at a faster rate than we had initially set a goal for. Not to say that we shouldn't be continuing to work really hard to find additional ways to continue that trend. And I think we've heard over the years that the low-hanging fruit is often the easy stuff, and then what comes later is perhaps a little bit more difficult. And I'm pleased to hear the officer's comments around the fact that for significant programs that have a significant impact on carbon emissions, that will be part of the information that comes to help inform our decision making. Because I think in all our decision making, we need to consider all of the impacts. And that should always, where possible, that should include the impact in terms of carbon emissions. My questioning around overseas travel was one where I think perhaps when decisions have been made, I haven't been aware that the carbon emissions has been included in that information, and I'm not sure if that's been foremost or been one of the things in elected members' minds when they've considered those decisions. But certainly looking at the travel category, there's some things we can have impact on, and there's some things we have limited impact on. Staff do need to actually transport themselves to work and home, but I do have a question mark around some of the level of overseas travel and whether there's the level of benefit to our ratepayers of some of that travel.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, I just wanted to comment how pleasing it is to have reached the goal ahead of time, albeit some of that is not necessarily through any decisions that we've made, but has been through maturation of the landfill, but still other things are trending down. So I do think it's something to be pleased about. I look forward to advice on what we should reset the target to and what the timeline should be. And I've noted that is coming in March, hopefully. So I think that will be very useful in terms of setting a realistic but achievable target going forward. So despite the lack of graphs, I'm very happy with this report. And I think we should just take the time to be pleased that we've achieved one of our targets 7 years ahead of time. Thank you.
Councillor Zabelin.
Thank you. Tautoko all that, Councillor. I think whether you're interested in, climate change or not, it's hard to disagree. It's been an absolute shocker of a year for extreme weather events around the world, not just in New Zealand. So it's sparking a lot of anxiety in our community and a lot of worry and concern that we might not be prepared or that we might not be doing enough, which is a very justified concern in my opinion. But when we have news like this, when we have experience like this, where we have accumulated knowledge like this, we should be sharing that, not just to celebrate the wins, but to galvanise our community out there who are feeling that fear and that uncertainty, that there are gains that can be made, there are things that can be done, particularly that excuse me, the point of the low-hanging fruit, I think is a very good one, that in the time that it's taken us to get these gains from addressing this low-hanging fruit, it's given us also a really good understanding of what that fruit higher up actually looks like and what it's going to require from us to continue to get these kinds of gains, and it starts to shape that up a bit more for us and light up that pathway ahead. So I'm very keen for us to share this win as far as we can and just spread some of that positivity in our community that we are committed and we are doing things, and it does take time, but our eyes on the prize there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just a brief comment from me. Firstly, really appreciate the work that officers have done, not only to bring us both these reports, but to bring them both to us at the same time. I know there's some work behind the scenes to kind of get that time frame aligned. I think it's really nice to see, in contrast, you know, where we are as an organization and where the wider community-wide story is in terms of emissions and how we're able to manage those, and absolutely concur with colleagues around there being some significant good news and some significant wins in here. I mean, not only are we seeing the 30+% reduction, 31.5% reduction, but you actually drill in and you look at some of those individual activities, and the scale of reductions are more in the 80% plus kind of range. So I think, yeah, great that we're celebrating, you know, individual actions along the way, but I think some collective celebration around and recognition around this would be really fantastic to, you know, demonstrate for the community that these sort of changes are possible and can be made, and acknowledging that, you know, quite a bit of this was in train in terms of the decay in the landfill, but some of the improvements that we've made in other parts of the organization, truly impressive and I think inspiring for where we can go in the future. So not only thanks to officers for the reporting, but thanks to everyone in the organization who's doing what they can in their own individual jobs to think about how they can actually contribute to improving our emissions performance in the future. So with that, we'll ask for a vote. Thank you. And that's passed 10 votes for and none against, which brings us on to the committee work schedule. I'll ask our Chief Infrastructure Officer if there's any comment around that. Comment, is there any questions around it? There being no questions apparent, I'll look to move it, seek a seconder, Councillor Zabelin, and call for a vote. Passed 10 votes for, none against, which brings us to the conclusion. I'll ask Councillor Johnson to close us out with karakia.
Kia puta, ki te whaio, ki te ao marama, whakamoia kia tina, homie huie takie.
Thank you, which appears to be on high noon for closing the meeting. Madam Deputy Mayor, any guidance around our workshop activities?
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. I see that we're scheduled for 1 o'clock to meet back again in the Missoula room. Do people have an appetite